Good afternoon and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. Today, I have the honor and privilege of interviewing one of my colleagues and classmates, Oscar Escobar, who has been a leader in his respective city. And we'll learn all about what he's been doing in Palmira, Colombia. And I'm pretty sure I butchered that, but he'll correct it for me. Oscar Escobar has been a rising scholar at Harvard Kennedy School, and I've had the privilege of being in a course with him that talks about adaptive leadership, where I've learned some of his great work and some of the things he's been doing in his term as mayor between 2020 to 2023. More particularly, Oscar Escobar, he was elected back in 2020 as the youngest mayor of Palmira. And he was in charge of leading the city's public policies. He's done great work that I think needs to be highlighted and recognized. And I am excited that he gets to talk about his work today. He was elected by 61,281 votes, which is a huge number, especially for his first term. And throughout his term, he actually led with the slogan, "There is another way." He was able to defeat 12 years of governance of traditional political class in the city, and it was able to tackle a lot of corruption and seek opportunities to move his city forward. So Oscar is now studying public administration at the Kennedy School, where he is continuing to gain skills and expand his toolbox in public leadership. He's also a Mason Fellow at the Kennedy School, and it is a privilege to have him on today. Oscar, thank you so much for joining and for seeing us through the technical difficulties that we experienced.
No, thank you very much, Shanequa, for the invitation and all the team. It's a pleasure to be here sharing with you our experiences, even though we're from different parts of the world. I think we have worked, it's very similar, and we face very similar realities sometimes. And it's great to be able to share it here.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you saying that. One of the things I just wanted to mention to our audience and to our listeners is one of our goals in 2025 is to expand our audience to include international voices, because as Oscar mentioned, what's happening in the US is very similar to what's going on around the world. And now more than ever, it's important that we're joining forces and we're working together across countries. So it's great to have you. Oscar, if you don't mind just talking a little bit about your why and what led you into running for mayor right around the pandemic, what was going on and what led you to rise into the occasion.
Well, I took two classes last semester that especially asked that question every time. And so I think I have done all the reflective work to try to find it. Because the truth is, I didn't plan to be a politician as a kid. I was the son of a businessman in my city in Palmira. But he was very poor as a child, and then did his business and gave me a very good life that I cannot complain. But I lived in my dad was cheap, as they say, right? That's the reason why he made his money. He didn't spend money just because. And so we lived in actually a middle class to lower class neighborhood. And so the neighborhoods was considered dangerous. So my mom wouldn't let me go out to play in the park. We lived in a second floor, and I would look at that reality from the balcony, and I would be like, watching everything that happened, wanting to play, but also realizing somebody got mugged, somebody got killed in the park. And I could not, let's say, I saw that from a privilege point, but I could not also be part of that reality. Sure. And so I guess at some point in my professional life, I decided to get out of that balcony and try to change those situations, right? And so that is a connection I have made last semester on why I ended up running for office and being in the public sector. Also because my dad, he had appliances. His business was selling appliances, and he had a store for 50 years. And so at the time, there was no malls, there was no credit cards. So access to credit was really difficult. And so he will, for example, people who got married went to my dad to get their first fridge or something like that, and he will just give it to people without down payment, without any credit scores. So the thing is, I could see as I was growing up how the impact of my dad helping so much people and how they were grateful to him. And so I think that was also another thing where I was like, wow, like I wanna uphold my dad's name and in helping people, and I just been
Sure.
trying to do it in another way. Let's say like what.
And it's such a incredible journey that you've been on, and it's great that you have been able to do some self-reflection around that why last semester. And thank you so much for sharing that. As you were talking, I was thinking also about one of the other sort of reasons why you talked about running for office, and that was essentially to combat corruption that was going on in your local government. And I was wondering if you can speak a little more to the ways that you were able to do that as mayor. What are some of the ways that you feel you were successful and in that mission to combat some of that corruption?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I don't know how you call it here in the States, but let's say in Colombia, we say that there's the opinion vote. And so people for president, it's people's opinions, it's feelings that drive the vote. But for
Sure.
local elections, especially Congress and city councils, there is a lot of machinery vote, we call it, which is the political structures, which they were very famous here in Chicago and many decades ago, right? So that type of politics where people vote because they're going to get a job, because they're going to get a subsidy, because there's some sort of transaction. And so
Mhm.
that's still very true in Colombia. And so my city, which is a mid-sized city, it's not the state capital, was said to be what I mean, it was said that in my city there was no opinion vote. And this is also related to inequality very much,
Sure.
because so the popular belief is that, oh, the higher income people, they have opinion vote, but the
Mhm.
poor people, they don't vote with opinion, they just get their vote bought, right? And
Mhm.
so I think it was that, I mean, I had worked in the national government, in the state capital, and I had seen how politics can be done differently. I had worked with leaders who were doing, let's say, a different type of politics than the regular one. And so I said,
Sure.
well, how come we can do this in other places and we cannot do it in my city, right? And so I
Right.
decided to challenge that, and I think it was very beautiful because definitely everyone has an opinion. Even though if you're poor, you have an opinion, right? You have your thoughts, you have your feelings, you have your worries. But sometimes in
Right.
this very unequal world, we tend to definitely value more the opinion of the wealthy than of
Sure.
the poor, right? And I think that's a challenge in politics too, being able to understand that those realities and to represent them effectively.
I think you said that so just you laid that out so well, especially with respect to those that may not be from a wealthy background or maybe from low socioeconomic status, is sort of what we call it here in the US. But those folks typically don't really get to um, utilize their voices either to vote or to be heard. And at times, that population may feel like their voices don't matter. But it sounds like you've been able to do great work in Colombia. I wanted to highlight one of the things in the article that you shared, particularly around the crime rate and the violence that had been going on in Colombia. It was ranked um, for about a decade among the 50 most violent cities in the world. But you were able to, through your term as mayor, support the city through a program called Pazos. You'll correct it again, but it seems like you were able to do some great work around helping to reduce the crime rate and work with those populations that typically, I guess, are not always heard or seen. those that are most susceptible to gang violence and young people that are in need of support and resources. It seems like in your tenure as mayor, you were able to get the crime rate down. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that was like and what was some lessons learned for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, definitely, like security and mobility are issues that are always in the top agenda of a city. But
Sure.
then, of course, there's also the data that shows you how objective this is, right? So
Sure.
I had other fellow mayors from cities where their homicide rate was 10% Palmiras, but they
Mhm.
will say security was a big issue, right? So they're always
Right.
important issues. But then I think in the world, we are now facing this dilemma of the strong men uh,
Mhm.
be challenging insecurity and crime just with a tough hand and with security. And of course,
Sure.
that is necessary. That is the role of the state. I mean, we are not an NGO. The state is supposed to provide security. But I think what we needed to do was to address the root causes of that violence, which is many times inequality, right? And
Sure.
so that was what Pasos was thinking of. Also, and I want to be absolutely honest, also because this easy answer, which is to say we'll just send more police and we'll have more of a strong hand, is
Sure.
not a possibility for mayors in Colombia, because in Colombia the
Mhm.
police is national. And so the number of police officers in one city does not depend on the mayor, it depends on the president, right? So it's
Wow.
something you cannot deliver. And
Mm.
so,
Wow.
I mean, on a practical level, it was the only thing we could practically do, right?
Sure.
That depended upon us. And so we first identified in our city the sort of, let's say, 50% of homicides happens like in 10% of neighborhoods. And then
Wow.
when you cross that with socioeconomic data, then you find out that is where most vulnerable people live. It's also the
Sure.
neighborhoods where more Afro-Colombians live. So there's
Mm.
a lot of cross inequalities. And it's also a place where people distrust the state a lot. Because yeah, it's seen as not trustable, or when you see the city, it's because they're gonna put somebody in jail. I mean, there's a lot of distrust, definitely. And so there
Yeah.
has to be a lot of trust building process first. And we did that actually with, let's say, the Paso strategy is not something that we just made up. It's a
Mhm.
collection of successful experiences from around the world that we put together and we adapted to our reality. So, for
Mm.
example, there's a very famous model here in Chicago, which is called the, oh my God, I just forgot the name, uh, but it's on violence prevention, in the
Sure.
sense of having like community managers for the like, interrupting violence. Pure
Mhm.
violence is called the methodology, right? And so we sort of kneeled into that experience. And the first thing that we wanted to do, that we needed to do, was have somebody from the neighborhood. And also the other important fact is this happens most around the world, is that homicides is concentrated in young men, especially, and in very young people, right? So instead
Sure.
of me, the son, the mayor representing the institutionality, and the son of a wealthy guy in the city going to the neighborhood and saying, "Don't worry, you'll do fine." You're like,
Mhm.
what is my authority? I mean, I have authority. I
Mhm.
had authority as a mayor, but I had no legitimacy to go
Mhm.
and try to bring them to the program. So we had young women and men from those neighborhoods who were victims of violence themselves to start working for the strategy, so that the state could come in and so that we can gain the trust of the people. And they were also interrupting violence. And that was just a little bit of how we started the strategy, by regaining the trust of the communities in those areas.
It's incredible. It sounds, I don't know exactly what the methodology name is, but it sounds very similar to what happens here in the US. We call them credible messengers, and that's
Mhm.
typically people that live within those neighborhoods that are
Right.
um, brought in to work with the government, because the success rate of having people within the communities that are already trusted, that may have the informal authority and the
Totally.
legitimacy, is so much more effective than bringing in the mayor to say, "Hey, say no to drugs, don't kill," right? And I
Yeah,
love that you guys
totally.
were able to use that strategy. There was something you also said that I wanted to touch on quickly. I know we only have a few minutes left, but you talked a little bit about the Afro Colombians and some of the challenges that they're facing. And I was wondering if you can just dig a little deeper into that for those that
Mhm.
are from the US and may not be aware of the challenges that Afro Colombians are facing. If you can speak to that for just a few moments.
Yeah, totally. I was just reviewing the data because there was a big controversy in Colombia in the last couple of years around how many Afro-Colombians do we have. There was a census in 2018, and the
Mhm.
number said something like 9%. And this
Mm.
was below the expectation of most experts and of previous data. And so after like a year of review process, the statistical agency in Colombia had to plea for pardon for the community and say, yeah, we screwed up, and it's actually around 12%. And
Wow.
one of the reasons that gap happened in the
Mhm.
statistical calculations is that uh, many Afro-Colombians live in areas that are or very far away in the Pacific region where we are also in places of high violence environments. So the data was not collected properly, was under collected in those areas, either because they were very far away, or because they were in dangerous neighborhoods, or because they don't even trust the system and they don't want to have anything to do with the government, right? And so that is I will say a bit of a background on Colombia as a whole.
Mhm.
The Pacific region is where we are. Let's say that Palmira, it's right next to Cali. It's when you Cali is the capital of the Valle del Cauca region, and it's said to
Sure.
be. It serves as is the third largest city in Colombia, and it serves as the capital of the Pacific. So it's the
Okay.
city in Colombia with
Mhm.
the most Afro population in the whole country, right? And we are
Wow.
very next to it. So, but we don't have again very very good data on it. But of course,
Yeah.
uh, we in Colombia say we like to lie to ourselves and say, oh no, we don't
Mhm.
have racism. That is in the US because we didn't have slavery, right? But
Sure.
of course we do have it. And of course it's very ingrained in
Yeah.
the economic inequality, right? And in the
Sure.
housing
Sure.
distribution and all of this. And so we had to address that by, again, representation on the credible messengers. Yeah, it's exactly what we were doing,
Sure.
and also through the type of things we did in the program. Because again, as you said, if I come to one of these neighborhoods with a sign in the park and say, "Come here and do not do any more drugs," nobody's gonna go there. But if we
Yep.
come as we did with sports, with music, with graffiti, with arts, then that
It's incredible.
creates interest in the community, and then
Sure.
starts to build trust to actually, after some interventions, it start bringing them to the other type of programs that we wanted, into the end result that we wanted, which was specifically to reduce homicide.
It's incredible. I appreciate you. I wish we could dive more into the specific programs that you all created um, and ensured were in these communities. But I'm wondering, there's two questions that come to mind in closing. And one is, what are you most proud of is when you were mayor? What are you most proud of in
Mhm.
terms of the thing that you felt like you did best when you were in your term? And then, secondly, my last question would be, what advice would you give to those that are in leadership and executive positions that may be working with communities around equality or inequality? That might be mayors or commissioners. We will call them in the US, depending on what state you live in, or governors. What are some advice that you would give to them around creating programs around equality? That would be my final question. And I could
Mhm.
reframe those questions if need be.
Yeah. Well, I think. in retrospective, definitely the PASO strategy is something I'm very proud of. Also,
Sure.
not only because of that, the fact that we achieved the lowest homicide rate in 17 years, but also because it sort of required some extra effort and leadership from the mayor's office, right? Because in
Right.
any government agency, what you have is everyone working independently in silos,
Right.
and then the education office over here and health over here, and sometimes it looks to the citizens like we don't talk to each other in government. And
Right.
I think a big key of having a successful program like this requires working all together to create trust with the communities, but also to know exactly the facing of each intervention, so it actually creates more impact in the community, right? And even things like when we had again our guys in the neighborhoods, credible messengers. I mean, of
Mhm.
course, they were trying to bring opportunities and they were trying to reduce violence. But if they ask of us to pave a road or to fix something in the water system, if we fix that, had nothing to do with the goal of the program, we were giving them trust with their communities. We were showing that
Absolutely.
they were also credible messengers. I mean, we were actually giving them that power, that importance. So I think that was crucial, and it required a lot of work to be able to do that. And yeah, I'm always very happy when I find people in the streets and who are beneficiaries of the program and remember what the opportunities they had and the change in the mindset and the new jobs that they have because of the program or whatever. So I'm very happy for that, no doubt. Um,
It's
and
incredible.
regarding, I think I answered maybe both of the questions in that one, because regarding the advice for other local governments doing this, I think it's very important uh, to to work articulated, not only between the government but with outside agencies. One of the key parts of the success
Right.
of our program was that we were able to work with the private sector, many nonprofits, and so we will make agreements. Let's say when we had the pandemic,
Mhm.
and a big strike in 2021, there was a lot of hunger in the streets, right? And we
Mhm.
needed to provide a very fast answer. And so we
Sure.
wanted to create community kitchens, but for the city to find the budget, to do the bidding and the contracting process, it will take
Sure.
like 6 months to a year. So we did
Right.
an agreement with the private sector, and they provided in like 1 month or two
Wow.
the inputs to create community kitchens, and they financed it for 6 months. And what the city did was I commit to sustaining that for the 4 years of the administration. And so we were able to provide a fast answer from the private sector, and then we continued. We guarantee its sustainability from the public sector, or
Mhm.
even also with the church, right? The church has a lot of legitimacy in the neighborhoods too.
Sure.
I mean, in Colombia and Latin America
Mhm.
are very Catholic countries, right? And so
Mhm.
sometimes the church could do things that we could not do, right? And so we,
Mhm.
we work very closely with the church. So I think it's key to be able to create those alliances, and to make a program in equity work.
Oscar, that was such a well-rounded answer that I really truly hope those that are working in local government can really take that advice. Public-private partnerships is what we call it. Oh, it's an evolving field that talks about local governments working with nonprofits. Um, because a lot of times, like you mentioned, our local governments are so complex and bureaucratic, and it takes so long to get things done. And so having those partnerships and alignments with nonprofits and churches, which we tend to underestimate, I think, in the US a lot, and depending on where we are geographically, that we don't realize that a lot of times when we join forces with churches, with nonprofits, a lot of our work can be accelerated, and then sustained through government support. So I love that you said that, and I really do hope that local governments and also the nonprofit sector is moving more towards those models, those towards that collaboration, for the sake of helping moving these complex problems forward